Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Arizona Cardinals fans, do you see red? Are you part of the Red Sea? Then you are listening to the show for you. A podcast for Cardinals fans, by Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider perspectives. It's time to rise up and see red. Welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess from CardsWire.com, a member of the USA Today sports media group, NFL Wire, and my co-host is Seth Cox, the editor of RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the NFL Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth is freezing his tail off in his new digs in Illinois, and I am still enjoying my balmy January New Year's here in Arizona. How's it going out there? I understand you just barely got the internet working.
Yeah, apparently they don't have internet service in Illinois, so it took them a while to get it set up. But a week later, we have internet. I was able to do a fun fan speak mock draft tonight for an article tomorrow. So things are looking up. Excellent,
and we are now in full off-season mode. The Arizona Cardinals finished their season. As we know, it was not the season they wanted. However, they did finish up the season with a mad blowout of the Los Angeles Rams, 44-6, to finish off a 7-8-1 campaign. They dodge a bullet. David Johnson has his streak end of 100-yard contests when he leaves with an injury that looked like perhaps would be devastating. They dodge a bullet. Turns out to be, at least if everything is cool and what they're saying, is that all it is an MCL sprain like what Tony Jefferson suffered, and he gets 6 to 8 weeks of rest and rehab and will be good to go. Whew. And so the offseason has begun. They're 7-8-1, no playoffs, and maybe we'll talk about the playoffs a little bit as the playoffs go on, but still a little bitter about the fact that the Cardinals aren't in it. So really kind of playoffs kind of stink. But what we're going to be doing tonight, recording on a Tuesday night, Thursday night, and that's all right. There's no set schedule. We're not going to really talk about the game against the Rams. We're full off-season mode. Cardinals have already started making some roster moves. They've added some guys, future contracts. We'll talk about those next week. Tonight's episode, which I believe is like number 143 of all the shows that we've done over the last 3 years. We're going to talk about the Cardinals season. We're going to go back and give some off-season votes, some final season awards, honors, ignominious distinctions, and kind of grade each position group. And hopefully the plan is we're not going to keep you listening for the next hour and a half like our last several shows have seemed to go, and keep this rather brief. So let's go ahead and get started. Letting you know that, of course, that this episode of the Rise Up See Red podcast is brought to you by fanessentials.net, where all the sports fans in your life, whether yourself or others, can find and collect your own team gear without having to leave your home. It'll get delivered directly to your door each month. Whatever team it is, birthdays, whatever league, whatever team, you can get it, and you get the gear delivered right to your home. It's wonderful, and it's very reasonable in terms of price. As packages begin at $34.99 a month. And for you, the faithful Rise Up See Red listeners, we can have you try it out, and with the promo code SEERED, again SEERED, when you sign up for at least a month, what you're going to do is you're going to get 15% off of that first month to test it out. That's, again, fanessentials.net for all the essentials you need. So let's go ahead and get started, Seth. We're going to talk about the season awards. Before we get started, if we would just kind of reflect on this. Now that it's done, now that it's over with, we've gone through the ups and downs and all the disappointments. What are your final takeaways from the season?
I think it's disappointment at this point. And the disappointment is the fact that they went on the road and beat Seattle. They blew out the Rams. Where was this team the first, 4 games of the season when they started 1-3? Where was this team in a critical stretch going to Minnesota and Atlanta and playing New Orleans? Where was this team? And, we can point to injuries. We can point to X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, at the end of the year, when they were at their most beat up, when they were at their most fragile, when they could have quit, they went up to Seattle and beat Seattle. And then they just absolutely demolished the Rams. And I think you have to look at that not as, it is good and you are happy to build for 2017. But I think more than that, you honestly look at it and go, kind of, what the hell? Like, what happened to this team that, they started 1-3. They took that devastating 0-3 stretch. And so I think that's kind of where it's at for me.
This was a team, if you look at it, it never was over 500. Not a single point in the season were they over 500. It was very fun at the end of the year. After all the exasperation of playoff hopes and sticking around it, once they were done and they were playing well, even with the loss to New Orleans, you finally saw a glimpse, and perhaps this is exasperating and frustrating to other fans, but you finally saw the team that we thought we were going to see all season, and it showed up in the last 3 games. And yes, they lost to New Orleans, but they put up 41 points on the board. The offense is like everything finally clicked against the teams that they're supposed to. And maybe we'll probably go into this a little more next week, but I'm going to do this is you can kind of look at the season in one of 2 ways. Obviously, disappointment is number 1. My general takeaway is they pressed after they lost that first week. And especially in a game that those were the types of games they won for the last 2 years before this year. The previous 2 years, they won those games. So they lost and they kind of put on their heels. They lost the game to the Rams. And then after that, things just, and Bruce Arians mentioned it the other day, they just started doubting, are they as good as they think? And they kind of fought that for the rest of the year. They never got on the same page until finally at the end. So there's the part of optimism say, well, they're not that far off. And so it's not like the window completely closed, at least for some. And for me, the window didn't close. It's just that they ran away from the window or tripped on their way to the window. And looking forward, as we're going to talk more during this next month or 2, they're not terribly far off if they can get their crap together like they did at the end of the season.
And I think that's what the most frustrating thing is. It would have been a lot easier if they folded up and lost those last 2 games, or lost to Seattle and then barely squeaked by Los Angeles, because you look at it, right, and you go, oh, well, look how beat up they are. You can't do it. But I think it's the fact that they were so beat up. They were without, their only starters on the offensive line that started day 1 were A.Q. Shipley and Mike Upati. And let's be quite frank and honest, Mike Upati was maybe
not Mike Upati
3rd
this year.
or 4th best offensive lineman by the end of the season that was playing. Not like, so you just look at it and everything, and it's one of those situations where it's unfortunate because you saw so much from this team in those final weeks. Like you said, the New Orleans game, the offense finally found the right gear, and the defense couldn't get, one stop late. And then the defense came back to life, and the offense, kept going. And you're like, where were these, where were these games at the beginning of the year? And I think that's the frustrating thing, because you're right. We know the window is closing. And not on the Cardinals in general, but on this version of the Arizona Cardinals, the window is closing. And you just hope that, they had the bad start in 2013. They had the Carson Palmer injury in 2014. They had the letdown in Carolina in 2015. And then they just, like you said, they never get out of their own way in 2016. Is the window open for a fifth season with this aging, roster and talent? And if so, can they capitalize? And I think that's the question mark at this point, is can they find that rhythm for 16 games plus a playoff run next year? Because if they don't, then I think that window closed in Carolina, in January of last year, and none of us just realized it until obviously it'll be too late, and then it really is closed. You and I don't think that, obviously, but that's kind of where we're at in the process, right? Like, if they don't make it this 2017 year, then I guess that Carolina loss was the end of that version of the Arizona Cardinals.
Right. Then let's move on to some season awards. We're going to talk about the MVP on both sides of the ball. Not only just who was the MVP, we're going to get some honorable mentions and stuff like that. The biggest surprise, the biggest disappointment, who would be our Cardinals Rookie of the Year, the Breakout Player of the Year, Best New Addition, and perhaps Worst Injury as well. And then after that, we're going to grade the different position groups. So let's start with the MVP. I think if we look on the offensive side of the ball, it's pretty obvious. You can't go anywhere else other than David Johnson, right?
Right. And it's a travesty that he's not in the MVP discussion, and it's probably going to upset me even more that he doesn't win Offensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I think it will be absurd. He will get my vote for, at least on the Pro Football Writers of America. He'll get my Offensive Player of the Year. I don't understand how. I mean, quarterbacks are a sexy pick every year, but he's had a historic year. I mean, you look at some of the things he's done, the streak that he had. He had over 1,200 yards rushing, and he had 80 receptions. In Cardinals history, we've had a running back. We had Larry Sanders, but he wasn't much of a running back. He wasn't much of a rusher. He had, 90-plus receptions, I think, 3 different times. The list of running backs who have had at least 80 receptions in a season? It's Sanders and Johnson. And Johnson did it with over 1,200 yards on the ground and doing it like a receiver, not little dump offs and things like that. So that's a historic season with the potential of being even more. Obviously, the offensive MVP. Where would you go with? I think obviously an honorable mention. We can't not mention Larry Fitzgerald for his season, for leading the NFL in receptions. Hoping please that this is not his final season, although I've said on the show a few times, he is tired. He's tired. His knee's bad. And yeah. I hope he can muster it up for another year.
Well, and I think a lot of it for him is he wants to know that they're committed to one more year and one more, amped up run before he makes his decision to come back and sacrifice his body one more time. But yeah, I think Fitz deserves it. Honestly, like the dark horse, the kind of unsung hero of the season was AQ Shipley. I thought he did a nice job. All things considered, he ended up being the best offensive lineman they had because he was the only one that stayed healthy and produced all year. Now, obviously, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald are 1 and 2 in your offense. And I would probably place Carson Palmer 3, but the fact that AQ Shipley was 4, I think says so much about what he did this year and his consistency. And then I think your 5th best player on offense this year is a coin flip between Jermaine Gresham and J.J. Nelson. And so this isn't a shot at AQ Shipley. This isn't a shot at Gresham or J.J. Nelson. But when you have the talent that we thought the Arizona Cardinals have on offense, and you're talking about AQ Shipley, Jermaine Gresham, and J.J. Nelson as, you know, your 4th and 5th best player in 2016, that sucks. But you have to, I honestly, like, it's one of those things where you respect the hell out of what they did and how much they, you know, put forth this year, because they did more than anybody could have expected from them.
Obviously, yes. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive MVP. You've got some players to choose from. You've got the big season from Tony Jefferson. You've got DJ Swearinger, who, especially late in the year, Patrick Peterson, who continues to, you know, it's almost overlooked now that if you look at the end of the season, you know, all pro rankings, Pro Football Focus, this and that. He doesn't even get honorable mention. You got Chandler Jones, you got Calais Campbell, you got Marcus Golden. For me, the defensive MVP does have to start with Chandler Jones, and that's because of his impact. Now, he had a lull in production in the second half of the season. He's had pretty much every year of his career, but his presence, and you wrote about it, changed the Cardinals defense and how opposing offenses approach them.
Right. And, you know, kind of as he went, the defense went this year. We saw that when he had his, I guess, winter vacation, so to speak, his pre-Thanksgiving break from playing well, the rest of the Cardinals defense couldn't, I don't want to say couldn't do anything, because they still produced some stats, some sacks and stuff, but it coincided with the worst, 4-game defensive stretch of the season when Chandler Jones was
neutralized.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah, neutralized, not good. Just like it's funny how it all coincided. Like all of a sudden, Chandler Jones is a non-factor, and the defense is sucking. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to put it, right?
Yeah, obvious. I think that's the way you have to put it. When he wasn't great, the defense wasn't good. Now, I look at it that way in terms of him being the MVP, because he was the kind of the centerpiece to everything that was added defensively, because they pretty much had everyone else in place. Marcus Gold was going to be on the other side. Calais Campbell was there. They had the question at the one cornerback. They knew where their safeties were. They had some injuries, but Chandler Jones changed that defense up front. Calais Campbell definitely deserves mention. He was absolutely, remember, he was producing, in terms of tackles, I think it's the lowest tackle number that he's had for pretty much his whole career. But after last season, when he was called out week after week by Bruce Arians really couldn't say much this year. He was glowing, especially with the second half of the season. He was absolutely unblockable. And whether it was he didn't have to be the focus every single play, he was just such a better player. And so you could attribute it to Campbell. You could attribute it to Jones, but I lean towards Jones because Campbell was already there, as was Golden. You add Jones, and the production from everyone else went up.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you're right. You know, it's hard to, I guess it's easy to overlook how good Patrick Peterson is. I was texting.
It's so easy to overlook because he just does it every week. He just erase.
Yeah, and so I was texting with Ian Wharton and Kyle Posey of the Bleacher Report NFL 1000 group, and they both do the cornerbacks. And I was giving them a hard time about Marcus Cooper, jokingly, but giving them a hard time about Marcus Cooper's ranking. And they both said the same thing to me about Patrick Peterson. They said, we grade them every week, and every week he's never number one. Like, he's never the number one corner, but every week he's like 4, 5, 6. And you forget that. And that's what they said. I said, it's literally because he's never tested. Literally every week they're throwing at not Patrick Peterson. And, that person is giving up yardage. So you forget that he's even over there. He had lapses the last couple of weeks. Cadet, Doug Baldwin beat him on a play, but for the most part, it was just simple. It was simply, not Patrick Peterson's guy, or whoever not Patrick Peterson is guarding scored another touchdown.
We saw it all year. I mean, whoever Cooper or Bethel or Brandon Williams, they got all the throws at them, and then Peterson just. They just know we won't throw that aside because we know. And he even managed to pick off a few passes and not just picks, but like amazingly acrobatic receiver type catch interceptions that he had on the season, which I'm sure for him was fun because as a cornerback, and it still is, you still get judged by the number of interceptions. And when you don't get thrown at, it's really hard to pick off passes.
Exactly. And so, so when we talked about it, in our group text, and that's what they said to me. They're like, honestly, we didn't even realize how good of a year he has. And I said, and it wasn't, shade or anything. I said, I don't think Cardinals fans do either. Like, I really don't because of that. But yeah, I think I agree. I think it would be Chandler Jones 1, Patrick Peterson 2, Calais Campbell 3, and I think you could put Kevin Minter and Marcus Golden, right up there as well because, they were your 5 best defensive players this year. I think if you wanted to go the opposite side, I wouldn't even say disappointing as in played poorly. I would just say disappointing as in it sucked that Tyrann Mathieu felt the need or the push to come back as soon as he did and as early as he did, because we saw how limited he was in his effectiveness. And, that I think that changed the dynamic of the defense in a negative way, because all of a sudden they didn't have another playmaker on the back end to create the havoc. Tony Jefferson is kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like an upgraded version of Rashad Johnson. He's always in the right place at the right time, but he's not necessarily making those dynamic game-changing plays. And one of the things you and I talked about with the fake numbers that this defense had all year was simply the fact that they didn't have those dynamic game-changing.
Hey, sports fans, football season's here, and it's time to get in on the action with MyBookie. MyBookie is the industry-leading sports betting website that offers real Vegas odds on football, baseball, and all your favorite sporting events. You can take a side, the total, or even fantasy points props. MyBookie lets you bet online and win big. Did the game already kick off? Don't sweat it. MyBookie has in-game live betting on every major league and event, even esports. There's no better time to join MyBookie than today. Go to MyBookie to open an account and start winning. Use promo code CHAMPION when you register for your account and get a 100% sign-up bonus up to $1,000 on your first deposit. Bet today. Visit MyBookie's website or call 844-866-2387. That's 844-866-2387. Check them out today and use promo code CHAMPION for a 100% bonus. Terms and conditions apply for entertainment purposes only. Void where prohibited.
Let's move to biggest surprise. And this could be on both sides of the ball. And so we've got some things there. You could go with, well, you could even say David Johnson's year. We could say Fitzgerald's year. You could say that we'll keep this on the positive side. For me, the biggest surprise turned out to be Marcus Cooper. And I recall specifically when the Cardinals made the trade for Marcus Cooper, I thought it was just about depth. It was just throwing crap at the wall. They need somebody with depth there. They're gonna take their lumps with Brandon Williams. And now he came out and he beat out Brandon Williams and he played pretty dang good. I mean, Pro Bowl alternate Marcus Cooper was a huge surprise for me. He took his lumps playing in the slot, but when he was lined up outside, he was at least as good as what Gerard Powers was a year ago.
Yeah, and so I agree with you there. I thought he was a refreshing, I think his play was overstated by fans because they're so desperate for a cornerback too. But I think he for what they invested, I think it was well worth it.
A seventh rounder in 2018, not bad for a Pro Bowl alternate, right?
Right, exactly. And I think for me, the guy that doesn't get enough credit this season, and I already talked about him, but was AQ Shipley. We had our issues with him on the show, and he's not a guy. He's not Travis Frederick. He's not a Pouncey brother. He's a very, very average and maybe slightly above replacement level, but he also played in every game. He made all the line calls, and he's just, one of those players that in a season where they didn't get the veteran production that we expected them to, they completely got more than what I expected them to out of him. And I think that's, for me, the best thing you can say about a player is that he did more than what we thought he could, and he did it well.
My honorable mention will go to DJ Swearinger. Remember the cast-off? They basically just picked him off the street. DJ Swearinger, super talented. I mean, super physically gifted, hard hitter, knucklehead, who wouldn't play special teams, that wouldn't do this, wouldn't do that, was not a good. Suddenly became, late in the year, he might have been the best safety on the team. And that's no slight on Tony Jefferson. That has to do with how good Swearinger was week in, week out, playing ultimately two different positions, because he played the free deep, and he played that really well. Hit guys, interceptions. And then when he got down in the box, he was every bit as disruptive, if not more so, than Tony Jefferson was. And he was another guy that you didn't expect anything from last year when you pick him up. I was like, oh, well, if this happens, great. If not, he was just a guy, and they didn't have to pay him anything. And he's probably going to get paid pretty dang good by somebody because he's resurrected his career. So he gets my honorable mention for surprise of the year.
Yeah, and I'm with you 100%. I think he deserves a lot of credit. And one of the reasons he deserves the credit is because based on what we read and heard, not anything like you and I know firsthand. So,
exactly.
This isn't, we're not trying to break news or anything, but what has been reported out of Houston, he just grew up as a person and became a player that you could rely on. And I don't think that was something that That's one of those things that you can't. You as an individual, as an evaluator or an analyst or a writer or anything, you don't know what's going to happen with a guy. And so when you see a guy respond in the way that DJ Swearinger did, you're happy because everybody knew coming out of South Carolina that he was an uber talented player, that he could be, a version of Cam Chancellor as a safety. The question always was, could he get his act together? And the fact that he did it here in Arizona and really prospered, hopefully that just means that they're going to bring him back.
I kind of had a disappointment on that. We're going to push the negative to the end. So let's go rookie of the year. Let's go with the top rookie on the team, which is going to be a little more difficult to do because of the fact that they didn't get much rookie production at all. Obviously, Robert Nkemdiche's kind of off that list. You've got Brendan Williams, you've got Evan Boehm, you've got Cole Toner, Harlan Miller, Marquis Christian. Oh, wait, never mind, Marquis Christian. And so in terms of the rookies, and then you've got a couple of drafted kids that, that made the team to start off. But, you look at what the rookie class did, and my rookie of the year, I think I'm going to have to give it to Harlan Miller for his play. And he was on the practice squad all year until the very end. Then he comes in and makes an impact on games at a position he was unfamiliar with. Brandon Williams was okay when he played, and he took his lumps. Evan Boehm barely played.
Oh, you're being generous now with the definition of okay.
So I'm gonna have to give it to Harlan Miller, the last of the draft picks that they have on their team.
Okay, so I might cheat. Is Matt Weil a rookie? No, I'm just kidding.
Actually, he would qualify as a rookie because he's a first-year player. I think in 2015 he didn't make out of the camp. So this is technically it is his rookie year. Yes, because he had no game experience previous to this year.
But yeah, I agree with you on Miller. You can't give it to Nkemdiche because something that you and I've talked about before, but draft tax, and so you can't get the same amount of playing time from your first round pick through 16 games as you did through your 6th round pick in 2 games, and then say, well, they played the same amount of snaps, so you just can't do that. So I agree with you. It's Harlan Miller with his 2-game stretch at the end of the season that he completely deserved it for. Honorable mention, we'll go with Marquis Christian because that was a good draft pick. I mean, it really was. And it's unfortunate that had to be found out via him playing special teams well in Los Angeles. And so, you chalk that up to unfortunate miscalculation on the Cardinals' part. They thought they would be able to get him through on the practice squad. It didn't work out. They did a poor job of utilizing him when he was here, and then they like I said, they thought they could get him through. Didn't work out. It is what it is at this point. So, but I will say this, and it's no silver lining because let's be honest, it's the Rams. It's good that he's good because it shows you that from an evaluation standpoint, that the scouts got it right. Yeah, they did a good job. It was from the in-season self-scouting or whatever you want to call it that Steve Keim or McDonough. It was just a mistake. It was. They haven't made a lot of bad mistakes. That was potentially one of them, especially when late in the year you needed a safety and you had to convert a corner from the practice squad to do it. Yeah. So, but but I think it's important to acknowledge that they didn't miss on their evaluation. In fact, their evaluation was pretty much accurate. They just missed on the fact that he could have helped them in a position of need.
Move on to the breakout. We actually got some. I think we've got some pretty good candidates here for breakout player of the year. Honestly, you could put David Johnson in this category. You've got J.J. Nelson late in the season. You could even say Jermaine Gresham. You could say DJ Humphries, Marcus Golden, Tony Jefferson, DJ Swearinger. My breakout player of the year, I have to give it to Marcus Golden. I want to give it. There's a lot of guys I want to give this to, but in a season where there was a lot of projected development about certain players that had to go right, they did go right. Marcus Golden, who was seen by most people as an extreme reach in the second round, like one of those absolute need picks, and as we learned later, it was almost a pick out of desperation because they lost the guy that they wanted. What a way that's worked out. Instead of Amir Abdullah and who else may have been in the third round, they ended up with Marcus Golden and David Johnson. Marcus Golden, 12.5 sacks. He has been everything that the Cardinals believed he could be. Absolute motor, productive. Now that they added Chandler Jones to that other side, fearsome pair of pass rushers.
Yeah, and he's a player that you and I have talked about before in what he is, and what he is something that teams need, and that's that secondary pass rusher that can make plays. And he's the guy that can clean up a lot of those pressures. He's the guy that has that relentless motor, and he's the guy that you can count on every game, to be there and working hard. He reminds me a lot of Paul Kruger when he was with Baltimore, and the Paul Kruger that was 9-10 sacks a year for 2 or 3 years in a row before he got paid somewhere else. And I don't know if he's a guy that you can build your pass rush around. I just don't know that, but I think he is a guy that you have to have on this team in terms of being a competent and good defense. For me, I think the breakout player this year was J.J. Nelson. And that's because you get the draft tax. Like, we may not have been huge Marcus Golden fans, but this was expected of him, right? Like, he was a second round pick. He was supposed to become a impactful player. Maybe he's a little more than what we expected, but he was supposed to be this. You and I joked that J.J. Nelson probably shouldn't have even been in the NFL because he weighs, 150 pounds. But they
talked about him all off season.
They did, but then he lived up to it, and that's what's always fascinating to me is when a guy lives up to the talk. So I give it to J.J. Nelson because he became a legitimate number 3 wide receiver. He's not a number 2. He'll never be a number 1, but he is a legitimate number 3 receiver. He's a guy that can put up, 600 yards and 8 touchdowns a year for the next 5-6 years. And hopefully he can learn how to hold on to the football and start returning punts.
Yes. And if we look at his numbers, even he didn't do much early in the season. It turned out he had a broken thumb. He was wearing a cast under his glove. 34 catches, 568 yards, 6 touchdowns.
Second most receiving touchdown, or tied with Larry Fitzgerald for the most receiving touchdowns on the team. Like that's crazy.
And on top of that, he had that crazy end around reverse. That oh my gosh! There were some times, and he was playing so fast. Like you got the ball in space and he just accelerates. He's incredible to watch. The key is, can he keep from breaking? And that's why I don't think he'll be able to play enough snaps. So he'll be between a 3 and a 4, in my opinion. If John Brown is never the same, JJ Nelson and John Brown are like the same player that become in the same mold. Like, two of them is a perfect number 3.
Yeah, and so I think they're in a good position, and I'm excited to see the growth and continued growth.
Obviously, the honorable mention can go to guys like Tony Jefferson, who finally is in position, and hopefully he doesn't have another disappointing offseason. Between, you could also say DJ Swearinger, Jermaine Gresham, although we've already seen that out of him in his career. He finally did it as a Cardinal. DJ Humphries, when they moved him over to the left side, looked fantastic. Let's go to the best new addition to the team. For you, who was the best new addition this year to the team?
I already used AQ Shipley, so I don't want to use that one.
But he's technically not a new addition because he was with them in 2015.
He didn't do anything. He was a fullback in 2015. I think obviously it's Chandler Jones, but that's too easy too, right? Like, it's got to be.
I don't know if you look at the roster, there aren't a ton of good.
No, there's not.
Because you got Cooper, you've got the rookies, you've got Chandler Jones, you got Evan Mathis who broke, and
is John Wetzel a new guy or no?
Oh yes, because he was a practice squatter last year. So yes, John Wetzel would qualify. To not give Chandler Jones all the awards, I think I would go with like a Wetzel because I thought he played well. You know what? Actually, I take that back. I'm going to go with a guy who technically was new last year but didn't play, and I'm going to go with Corey Peters. So I know technically he was on the team last year, but he never played. And I thought that Peters' play this year was exactly what Arizona wanted from him, but it came in a season where they regressed, so everybody's going to overlook what he did, which is really, be an athletic nose tackle that's able to not just 2-gap but also 1-gap at times, and he was a disruptive force, and quite frankly, he was their second best defensive lineman all year after Calais Campbell. So yeah. But that's kind of cheating, but I didn't want to give it to Chandler Jones. He didn't play last year. We'll make that. And you have to at this point give it to Chandler Jones, but we will definitely give honorable mention to both Marcus Cooper, Pro Bowl alternate cornerback, and John Wetzel. That was a as the kids say, a low key great addition to the Cardinal squad. And his play along with it. My gosh, yes. I mean, you have a guy that you can trust to play left tackles. They've got 3 left tackles. Now, I'm not going to say that he could. I'm not going to say that he could do that on a long-term basis. But the fact that he held up against the guys that he held up against, that's really good. Exactly. Worst injury of the year. We'll do that before we hit the big disappointment. Then we'll talk briefly about some group grades. Biggest injury, I think, for them happened to be the worst injury. It happened a long time ago. I think I'm going to have to go with Evan Mathis because that position just wasn't ready for most of the year.
And see, I thought the Mathis one was bad until then the Valdir one happened, and then the DJ Humphries one happened. And so then you're like, oh my gosh, that's 3 starters that the Cardinals have lost within a season. A guy I gave a lot of grief to all season, a guy that I questioned at the time, the signing, Tyvon Branch. That I really do think that screwed up the entire season for defensively for the Cardinals, because I think it forced them to do more with Tyrann Mathieu than they wanted to early. And then they ended up, we saw how that ended up. And let's be honest, I think he's the first person in NFL history to end up on IR twice
in a season.
So, that's got to count for something. And I'm not making fun of him because I really do think losing him negatively impacted the season for the Cardinals because it
forced Marcus Cooper in a slot where he was no good.
Yeah,
and Tyrann was no good in the slot this year.
Yeah, Tyrann wasn't ready. It forced Cooper into the slot, which forced Williams and Bethel outside. And we saw all season that all of those things were bad. So I thought Branches, but then Bethel got into the slot and was good. So, but again, something I've talked about, self-scouting's hard. It really is. And so that's where, most of your mistakes come from. But, I thought that Branch injury really, really screwed up the flow of their season. Because, as bad as the Evan Mathis one was, like you said, I thought they had guys in place for that. They had no backup plan for Tyvon Branch other than Tyrann Mathieu, which, as we said, he wasn't ready for that.
And then finally, biggest disappointment of the season. This one is tough. And I'm gonna go all the way. Maybe I think Robert Kimdichie is going to come up on this list of if we're ranking them. He's got to be on that list. Chandler Catanzaro, Drew Butler, special teams as a whole. Maybe. But I'm going to have to give it to, in the biggest disappointment, and I don't mean this negative, but the biggest disappointment ended up being Justin Bethel, and that's because of the injury. For me, because it sent that position into a tailspin from the start that actually turned out to be okay with Marcus Cooper. But if Justin Bethel is healthy all offseason, or if he doesn't re-injure his foot twice, maybe we're never having this discussion about Brandon Williams or Marcus Cooper because Bethel would have been serviceable out there. Now, maybe he saved his career in terms of now they've got potentially a third guy who can play in the slot. But, there's another. You got Tyrann Mathieu and his comeback. There's so many different ways you can go. What's going to be your number one disappointment?
I think for me, it was the way Bruce Arians handled the early part of the season. I thought he was too soft to start the season, and he's admitted as such. They had too much of a relaxed atmosphere at training camp. I understand the Veterans Days off for Carson Palmer. I get it. He has only a limited number of bullets left in the chamber. You have to give him some rest. But I thought overall he was too. He set the tone, in my opinion, for the season to be looked at as, we're one of the elite teams, as opposed to what he talked about, saw on the Amazon series, which was, we haven't accomplished, bleed. And I felt like they didn't take that attitude again coming into this season like they did in 2015, where we saw them rally and kind of have that mentality. And then focusing the offense on Carson Palmer and the passing game and not adjusting to what teams were doing. I thought all of that, it took 8 weeks before they did, and before the offense really got rolling again. And, it's not an indictment of him. It's just, sometimes coaches have bad seasons too.
He did. For final segment, let's quickly go through some positions and grade them out.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Quarterback. I think at the end of the year, it ended up being a B with Carson Palmer. It was a B season. Not an A-plus season like last year, but definitely a B season, but the way he played it down the stretch.
But, I mean, isn't that kind of Palmer's career at this point? Like,
yeah.
Flashes.
You probably could give his career. You take away last year, you're probably grading him out of B- or C+ because the talent's there, just doesn't quite put it up.
Yeah, and it's just not. You don't see it consecutively. I think a B- is completely fair. I think he played well at times and he played not well at times, and that's who he is.
Running back, obviously A. And it would have been an A+ if they'd gotten more production from other places, although Kerwin Williams just might have
finally made the roster.
Finally. Receivers, C, and that's only because of Fitz and Laird and Nelson when they were supposed to be an A+ group.
Yeah, and maybe both you and I missed that, and that was the biggest disappointment of the season. The wide receiver.
That's because Floyd's gone. We completely forgot.
Well, not just Floyd, but just the wide receiver core in general. Like, we were talking about generational talent, and it ended up like we ended up in
3,000 yarders again.
Yeah, we ended up in week 5, 6, going, holy crap. They're going to have to draft a wide receiver this offseason. Like, they have a need at wide receiver. That was something we never expected. So,
tight ends. Jermaine Gresham really helped. Darren Fells disappeared until the very end. For what they do, I'm going to have to give them a B because they blocked well. And especially Jermaine Gresham showing his value, making it going to be very difficult to let him go if he has to go. So, yeah, I think same, like, they're average, but they're good at what they're asked to do. So I think, if you want to give them a C+, B, I think it's all fair. Offensive line, I bounce between a C and a B. That's because, they gave up way too many sacks to Carson Palmer early in the season. They fixed that,
were
though.
Healthy.
They were doing well with backups. It was the backups that played well in the pass protection. And the running was solid. The run blocking was solid. But, I think it's going to have to be C+, B- because that line was supposed to be better. Yeah, I'd give it a solid C+. Defensive line, I can't really – this defensive line played well. They got great play from Calais Campbell. They got more than adequate play, a very understated play by Corey Peters. Plus, Josh Morrow kind of came on in his own, very dependable. Frosty Rucker was solid. Rodney Gunter made plays in a limited amount, and so did Xavier Williams. Well, the only one you look at is, that he had a down year was Kimdichie, and that was, and Stinson disappeared. But I have to give the defensive line an A. Yeah, I think that's fair. I'd probably give them a B, but I think that's fair. The linebacking core on the whole, I think you give an A to the edge and a solid B- to the inside backers. Minter played very well. Dayon didn't have he wasn't as good as 2015, but he still made plays. And then we learned, he had an ankle issue that he was dealing with most of the year. Yeah, I think it's fair because I think you could say an A- and a B-. So I think a B overall for the linebackers would be fair. We can talk about this next week, maybe with Dayon Buchanan. I think we expected too much of Dayon Buchanan when in reality he's basically just the same player he has been, and the NFL is kind of figuring him out, and he's having to adjust for the first time. Could be. Cornerback. Obviously, Patrick gets an A. The other side gets, I don't know. I'm gonna give the unit as a whole. Well, then you have to factor in the slot C+, and that's only because of Patrick. Maybe I'm being harsh there.
Are we talking just corners then?
We'll talk outside and slot. If I'm factoring the slot, that's why it drops it. If you take the slot part out, I say B, because you did have a Pro Bowler and a Pro Bowl alternate.
Yeah,
but then the slot was rough this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And safeties. When you look at the safety play, that the two safety positions, that was fantastic. They get an A this year, and they both might be gone.
Yeah, they got to re-sign Swearinger. I like Tony Jefferson, but he's going to get paid too much. He deserves it. I bring back Swearinger. But yeah, I'm with you. I'd give it like an A-. They're still not great in coverage, but they do a good job at everything else.
And then special teams, can you give them anything else other than a failing grade? I mean, Catanzaro, up and down, but the punting was awful most of the year. The return game was, with kick returns, it was just, worse than awful. Punt return, when it was Patrick back there, was okay. Coverage units were better. But, when the special teams unit gives up, basically costs you as many as 5 wins. You can't pass them this year.
Bad. Yeah, I think F is fair.
And coaching. This was a very average coaching year. Very average.
C. I think you had some high points. I think you had some really low points. I think overall it was the same as their overall record. Average. They're 7-8-1. Obviously 500 is average, but I think you and I would both agree that they were basically an 8-8 team, and they were average. They were really bad in times. They were really good in times, and they somehow never found a way to be consistently either. So they end up right in the middle of the pack and 7-8-1, and I think like you said, C for the coaching, because they were average.
All right, and that'll bring us to the end of this latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. We'll be back again next week. We'll have to work out the kinks now with Seth in another state. We'll figure out the schedule for what we're going to do moving forward. But that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. You can find us pretty much anywhere. You can find us on Carswire, on Revenge of the Birds, on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook and Twitter is Rise Up Sea Red, on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio. Anywhere you can find a podcast, you can probably find us. Thanks for listening. Again, that's Seth Cox from the Birds, Revenge of the Birds, and I'm Jess Root from Carswire. We'll be back talking more off-season Cardinals coming up next week.
Have a good night, everybody.